entitled Impressions of Clouds, and my thesis is the life cycle of Impressionism depicted through the lens of three artists' cloud motif: John Constable on pre-Impressionism, Claude Monet within Impressionism, and Vincent van Gogh within post-Impressionism. And this specifically kind of focuses on the clouds because I think that Impressionism and all of those qualities of what makes up Impressionism is really communicated through the techniques that artists use to paint their clouds. So first, talking about John Constable's cloud study and Salisbury Cathedral from the Meadows. So I'm going to talk about those kind of as a whole and him as a whole. But Constable is kind of the link from realism to Impressionism. And during realism, portraiture was highly valued because it's what the masters did. And so he still did those to like make money, but his passion project was doing landscapes. And he maintained a realistic style, but and also within realism, because he has a very opaque use, it's what anchors him in realism. Like within the this is not as light as airy as Impressionism is, and so he still is anchored in realism because of his opacity. But he moves into Impressionism because his use of bright colors, and he really pioneered in plein air painting, and he wanted to make them real and natural, like his colors there, because the masters had been doing in realism everything was still dark and muddy because masters painted in smoky dark rooms with candles and their thick oil painting mixing all the pigments and everything. It was just so much muddier, but he maintained he wanted to use bright colors like in the sky and this rainbow. He still painted his large paintings in studio. Like I said, he was pioneering in plein air painting. It wasn't widely accepted yet like it is later in Impressionism, but he did lots of studies like the cloud study, and there's multiple different renditions of him studying this cathedral. But he also has a more painterly aspect to it, not straight up like a photograph that realism would like to be in this. Like, even though this look like, if you look up in the sky, this is what clouds look like, but you can start to see brushstrokes, and there's still in this in the cathedral, there's still juxtaposition of light and dark that emotes feeling in like a symbolic way, and that really paves the way for Impressionism because their goal is primarily feeling. So that moves me to Monet's Poppy Field, which this is full-on Impressionism. And Impressionism didn't just paint what they saw, but it was how they saw it. And simultaneously, depending on dates and whatever, in literature, their Romanticism is going on, and that really focuses on nature, creativity, and imagination, emotion, and supernatural. And like, though Romanticism was more fantasaical, that's not a real word, but into fantasy, this still in a way has all of those aspects. But the Impressionists really wanted the viewer to have a sensory experience. You can feel the sun and you can hear the wind and smell the poppies of this field. And there's a very hazed aspect to it of like how he saw it rather than exactly what he saw. And I think that it would also be interesting to do more research in like the symbolism of poppies and how they're an opioid in conjunction with haze. And it's also interesting, like in his lifetime, opioids would have gone from something that was widely used to something that was more tabooed in use and became more legal and controlled substance. But also within specifically his clouds, they're very splooched and splotched and no longer look super real. Like, that doesn't necessarily look like outside, and kind of just starts to leave realism in the dust. But Impressionism still maintains the atmospheric perspective and like the rules of perspective. But the viewer can still feel like they are standing in the field. But that brings me to Van Gogh's Wheat Field with Cypress. This is one of my favorite paintings of all time. But this is post-Impressionism, and their goal still maintains the idea that that the painting makes you feel and have a sensory experience. And Van Gogh really had the goal of painting with purpose as art and wanted to comfort his viewers. And even though he like had a very tragic life in a lot of sense and like didn't sell paintings, he leaves like basically all aspects of realism behind. In this, it has so much more of a 2D sense, and it doesn't really utilize atmospheric perspective as clearly as all of the rest did, but it has more of like a layering sense, but it doesn't. And there is a background, but not really. It's more all just on this one 2D flat layer of this all kind of sits in the foreground in some sense. Like it doesn't get any less detailed in the back. But in plein air has been like totally normalized by now, and so the bright colors that you see is what he saw, but also like how he saw it and how he felt it. In a sense, and there's so much movement in the shape of the clouds, in all of the shapes and the color blocking. And I think it's important to note that these are, like I said earlier, the 2D layering is very much like shapes rather than form, and that like really paves the way for I never can say this word, Fauvism, whatever the next movement that comes after this that like has a lot more color blocking sense and a lot heavy on brushstrokes. But artistic timelines are always in like conclusion. Artistic timelines are in constant evolution, and it was because Constable wanted to use bright colors and paint outside, and Monet wanted to just kind of make everything fun and free that things evolved into Cubism, and Jackson Pollock could use just colors on a splashy screen, and all of the minimalism that we studied like could remove that artistry in the hand from that. And it's interesting to see how that like travels throughout time.